Past Wednesday was Halloween. Thursday was All Saints' Day. Friday was All Souls' Day. Dia de Muertos. Yesterday was the funeral and celebration of life for Carl Chan. It all fits together. Death and sainthood are somehow connected. But one of the most troubling dissonances between Christian faith and modern secular culture, I think, is our attitude toward death. For the secular, materialistic culture, death is the end. It's to be fought at all costs. Nothing good about it. We spend a huge amount of money in our country on medical care, and a great deal of that cost comes in the last year of life, the last month of life, the last week of life, putting off death as long as possible, if you can afford it. The only so-called good deaths, which is the translation of the Greek word euthanasia, are those that relieve an unendurable pain when there is, as they say, no hope left. That's not the Christian view. While Christians are certainly encouraged to care for their physical health, to avail themselves of our really wonderful medical resources, and to advocate for everyone to have access to those resources, we don't see death as defeat. We don't see death even as something to be considered a great loss. It is the completion of this life. That's what Jesus said on the cross. It is finished. It is completed. In the burial office, we pray that through the grave and gate of death, we may pass with Christ to our joyful resurrection. I said yesterday at the funeral that each of us may have our own way of picturing that, imagining that, but all of us affirm as Christians that there is a larger life than the one that is bounded by our physical birth and our physical death, and that we somehow participate in that life in eternity. Death, where is thy sting? As Paul said. The idea of sainthood began with death, the death of the early Christian martyrs, the first Christian martyrs. These Christians who were killed by the Roman authorities simply because they were Christian. The word martyr in Greek means witness. And those who died for their faith while affirming their faith were understood as witnessing, giving testimony through their courage and their commitment and their willingness to sacrifice, testimony concerning that higher and deeper life that we talk about as resurrection, beyond death. They follow the apostles, who we learn from the book of Acts, when they chose Matthias to replace Judas, the apostles had to be witnesses to the resurrection. And the word martyrs, they're used there as well. And Jesus himself is seen as the archetypal martyr, giving witness on the cross to that greater life that death can't kill. Now, over time, these martyrs were seen as having a kind of special holiness, just as the apostles had a kind of special holiness, or Jesus was seen as having a kind of special holiness. The word for saint comes from the word holy. Now, the saints, of course, weren't equal to Jesus in holiness, but they were felt to be maybe more accessible to normal people as intercessors, as advocates, since as the beginnings of the church went on, there was an increasing sense of the divinity of Jesus, and that made relationship with Jesus a little more difficult. He was, after all, said to come to be their judge. So, what do you want to tell directly to the judge? So people turn to the more compassionate Mother Mary, or to the more presentable, less compromised saints, thinking that they might be able to borrow some of their unused merit to claim entrance into the kingdom for themselves. And it got really very technical and transactional, and was in fact one of the issues surrounding the Protestant Reformation. Now, we in the Episcopal Church tend not to see things in that kind of technical way, although the connotation of some kind of perfection, I guess, still comes with the word saint, as in the sort of colloquial, well, I'm no saint, but there's the very involved papal process for someone becoming a saint. Their background is checked extensively, and they're required to perform miracles. In the Episcopal Church, we've evolved from what happened was we pared down the list of Roman Catholic saints and added some Anglican saints, like the martyrs that were burned surrounding the Reformation, and came up with our own calendar of saints, the major ones, but then also a calendar that we call lesser feasts and fasts, and it has a bunch of days, and you can look on the calendar and see what day each saint is. But it was realized relatively recently that 90-something% of these saints were male. You can tell from some of our hymns, ye patriarchs and prophets blessed, right? That's the patriarchy. And so in the Episcopal Church, there started to be requests and consideration of expanding that calendar. And it was expanded at the General Convention, which is a little different process than the papal process, but nevertheless is helpful. And there were supplementary calendars provided. The first one, which was much more inclusive, was called Holy Men and Holy Women. It had some women. And also more modern saints, modern martyrs. Martin Luther King is in that book. But then the most recent list of special commemorations, which I suppose I could just read to you. You're welcome to look at it. It includes more people and more diversity. It's called a great cloud of witnesses, rather than focusing on holiness and focusing on sainthood. It goes back to that original word, that original sense of martyrs being witnesses, the people who show the possibilities of relationship with God and what it can mean in someone's life and what it can mean for those around to them. Witnesses in their life to a higher power, to a greater hope than the limits of our earthly personal existence convey. These people are windows to God's beauty, doorways opening to God's love. Examples as we work on this more and more of real people in real life that we can really follow, rather than just sort of venerate from a distance. Perfection is not required in our usual understanding of the term. In fact, what we learn, at least what I learned from this cloud of witnesses, and we use this on our Wednesday service as it comes up in the calendar, to commemorate these people. All these saints show the, I think, innate capacity of all human beings to express God's beauty, to incarnate God's love in ourselves. Something else I said yesterday. To show forth the Spirit of God in our lives. Recognizing that there is being beyond ourselves. There is life beyond our life. That, as I've said often, the center of our life is not us, but God and whatever it is that God is doing. Discerning that, we can express that, we can deepen that, and show that holiness ourselves to the world. That's our purpose, that's our meaning. And as our sequence hymn said in that wonderful language, English village language, shepherdess of the green, meet them at tea language, we can be one too. That may call for sacrifice sometimes. But it's most often, these days at least, a sacrifice of lies instead of lives, which still can be painful for us. We need to let go of a whole lot of things that are central to our life. Let go of our grasping for wealth or fleeting pleasure. Overcome what is really a faithlessness in letting our lives be controlled by fear of any kind, and opening up. Why wouldn't we, to the boundless life and joy of God's wholeness and truth, as we are allowed, graced to live it out. We love our neighbor as ourselves because our neighbor is ourself. There's no real boundary. We love our neighbor even when they're a stranger as ourselves. Because we have parts of ourselves that are strangers to us as well, that need to be loved. And we even love following the command of Jesus to love our enemies as ourselves. Because whenever we have an enemy, it really just reflects some enemy within we're not really in touch with, and that needs forgiveness, that needs love. That's what the cloud of witnesses teaches us. The first saints, the martyrs, knew that. They were witnesses not only to their fellow Christians, this small, sort of strong-willed, non-conforming group, but they were witnesses as well to all those people in the Colosseum stands that cheered their violent death. That crowd who, over time, by that powerful witness, came to a faith that was able to sustain them through the collapse of their civilization. That's something that happens. But we know the key. Some of them were torn by fierce wild beasts, but you can also meet them at school, or in lanes, or at sea, in church, or in trains, or in shops, or at tea, or at protest marches, or at homeless shelters, or at an AA meeting, or a Zen meditation sitting. You can meet them in a lion dance on the 4th of July parade. At least you could when Carl was in the lion's head. Probably still. You can meet him here and now. Here. Right? Now. In this time, in this place. God helping, I mean to be one. I try to be one. And you can too. Thanks be to God.